Welcome to the Patrick Coffin Show. There's a statement attributed to Mark Twain that goes something like this: if voting changed anything, they wouldn't let us do it. Today we're going to talk about oligarchic control and the big picture behind history, and we're going to talk about Carroll Quigley and what an oligarchy is. We're going to talk about COVID-19, the lockdown, the election. Does it really matter about voting at this point? Our guest is G. Edward Griffin. You're going to love him if you've never heard of his works. Coming up soon. This episode brought to you by Coffin Nation. Check out coffinnation.com. Find out what folks around the world are talking about. If you like this show, I think you might like the membership. If you want to make a one-time donation, you can go to patrickcoffin.media/donate, and we would appreciate your assistance. This is listener-supported, totally independent, not beholden to corporate cash or anyone else besides me and you. Coming up next, G. Edward Griffin. I'm honored to be talking with G. Edward Griffin, who's been red-pilling people since at least the 1960s. He's the founder of RealityZone.com, Red Pill Expo, Red Pill University. He's the author of books like World Without Cancer and The Creature from Jekyll Island. G. Edward Griffin, welcome to the show. Appreciate your time.
Well, thank you, Patrick. It's a pleasure to be here.
I'm getting through The Creature from Jekyll Island, a reference to the literal Jekyll Island off the coast of Georgia. And you write like a mystery novel writer. Normally, banking economics, like, I'm already asleep, but you've turned it into a page turner. Let me start with how you got into all this. Were you raised in a financially savvy family? Were you always interested in the big picture of what's happening in the culture? How did you fall into this work?
No, au contraire. No, I'm probably the least likely candidate. If you were to look through our high school yearbook or my university yearbook and try to pick out somebody that would do this, I would be at the very bottom of the likely list. I had no interest in these things. In fact, that's hard to say what I did have an interest in. I was just like most kids, I wanted to have a good time with the least amount of effort and obligation. And I was going through life like most people in our system. Unfortunately, I think I was pretty much on the materialistic side. I wanted to have a lot of money. I wanted to have a big house. When I grew up and did all those things, I wanted to have a trophy wife, the most beautiful girl in the world, having a big car, travel around, all of these things. I don't know why, but I guess I was picking it up from my culture. And so I really would be a very low candidate for that. When I went to school, I tried diligently not to spend too much time with the books, only enough to get through in the exams. And really what I did, and I'll give you a little bit of my background to give me some relief from this, is that for a weird series of circumstances that are not important, I got into acting as a child in Detroit, radio acting. They were looking for kids to participate in. People don't realize, but Detroit was sort of a secondary center for radio broadcasting in the day. Yep. The Lone Ranger came out of there, the Hermit's Cave, the Ford Theater. That's right. So they were eating up little kids. They needed kids as actors to play those roles for the Lone Ranger. So I tried out, and all of a sudden I was an actor. I was about 12 years old. And some of those old radio shows, if you heard, like the Lone Ranger, he said, "Gee, Dad, here come the Indians." It might have been me. I don't know. But that's what
only the shadow knows.
Only the shadow knows. Yeah, that came from there also. Yeah. So, you do know about Detroit. So when I went to school, naturally, I went into the school of, communications and art and drama and that kind of thing. Nothing very academic, obviously. And television was just coming online in those days. So after I graduated, I worked for a little while at WWJ, which was one of the very first, very large and professionally built television stations. And I was an assistant director there, or floor manager would be a better name for it. And so that's what I did. And that's where I was headed, or so I thought. And so when I came over to Los Angeles after I got out of the Army, I came here to Hollywood. Of course, this is where you get into the entertainment field, I thought. And by this time, I did have the trophy wife, a beautiful girl, best looking nurse on campus in nursing school. We got married. By the time I got to Los Angeles, we had another Griffin and another one on the way. And I was looking for that big break and going through all my savings. And finally, I came to the bottom of the bank account, and I said, well, I guess I better get a real job. And I looked around, and I saw people that I thought had as much or more talent than I did. They were wasting their lives waiting table and washing cars, waiting for the big break in Hollywood. And I just decided that was not going to be my path. So I got a real job, and I went to work for a large insurance company in their underwriting and sales assistance department. I was developing group insurance plans for corporations that wanted to insure their employees. And so I was rising through the corporate ladder, and I was doing very well, and I had figured out that if I just kept my nose to the grindstone and did everything that I was supposed to do plus 20%, that by the time I was 35 or 45, I'd probably be president of the company. That's where, again, I was still pursuing those materialistic goals, you know. And then something happened. Something happened along the way. I picked up a booklet written by a college professor in the Midwest. I still have it somewhere. I wish I could remember the name of it, but it was a critical book about the United Nations. And that struck me as very odd. In fact, I was kind of outraged by it because I had just gone through the school system, which meant that I was taught that the United Nations was our last best hope for peace. And it did only good things. And this college professor had the audacity to say that, nope, that wasn't it. That was perhaps the first red pill I ever confronted. And by the time I started to check it out, Patrick, I found out that he was right. I went back to the library. I was curious, and I started to check out some books on the topic. And first thing you know, I realized that, all of this materialistic world of pleasure I was anticipating was going to go out the window if something didn't happen to change the course. I became interested in what was going on in the world, outside of just me and myself, my family. And I discovered that I had a crusader gene. It started to vibrate. I didn't know I had it.
It activated.
My life activated, yeah. And so all of a sudden, I decided that, I have to do something about this. This is serious. And here I am, Don Quixote, tilting the windmill. I'm going to save the world. I quit my job. My poor wife almost died. She said, how are we going to earn enough money to eat, I said, we'll figure it out somehow. And now that's sort of the background, how something happened. A little pamphlet changed my entire life. And so I started to apply the skills I had learned in school and with my training so far. And I decided I would start to make little low-budget documentaries on the topics that I was learning about. And in that process, now here it comes, Patrick, I decided I was going to produce a little documentary film on inflation. What's the cause of inflation? I really wasn't quite sure myself, but I was pretty sure that it wasn't what everybody thought. Everybody thought it was the other guy. They're all pointing to each other. Well, the farmers were getting too much money for their crops, and so our prices are high, our groceries. And the grocery stores would, no, it's the unions. And then, the unions would say, no, it's not that. It's the grocery stores themselves. They have too much profit margins. And everybody's pointing the finger at someone else, the finger. And I thought, well, that's not it. I'll find out. So I started to do some research and never did do the documentary, got sidetracked. But I did by this time acquire a couple of banker boxes full of books and papers and recordings. And then some years later, little old ladies in Pasadena we've all heard about, and invited me to speak at their little group. They had a tax group, a tax protest group. And I said, well, I don't know much about taxes, except that they're too high, and I'm against them. But I know something about a hidden tax you might like to hear about. A hidden tax? I said, what's that? Well, inflation is a hidden tax. By this time, I knew that. Oh, that'd be wonderful. Come by. So I gave the speech, and it was quite an amazing success. I kind of surprised myself because as I started to organize and prepare for the speech, I got some organization to the topic, and it dawned on me that this was really more profound topic than I realized. So everybody liked the speech, and they said, you should take that on the road. Well, that's what I did. I took it on the road. And I did a series of one-day seminars called A Crash Course on Money. It was all about the origin of money, how it comes into being, who does it. Most people don't know where money comes from.
Right.
and what this thing is called inflation. And that was very successful, but I'm going to cut this now to the chase. After about a year of doing that, I became self-aware that I was a fraud, a real total fraud, because I was offering myself as some kind of an expert on money. And I didn't know about how money comes into creation. I figured that out. I'd read the books and I'd talked to the experts and all of that. But at the end of almost every one of my seminars, people would come to me and they'd say, well, Mr. Griffin, you know, my husband died a few years ago. We have a small nest egg, and I don't know what to do with it to safeguard it for my future. Should I invest it in real estate? Should I get out of debt, or should I go into debt? Who can I trust? How should I protect myself?
Yeah.
And I realized I hadn't the foggiest idea about those
but
things.
you were being treated like the answer man.
Yes, I was the answer man, and I didn't have any answers. So I felt that this isn't right. So I stopped doing those, and I enrolled in the College for Financial Planning, and it's a CFP course. I didn't intend to become a financial planner, and never did. But I wanted to learn about the real markets of money and how money is used, not how it was created, but how it was invested, and how people could, you know, protect themselves in an inflationary cycle. And so I did get my degree, and then in that process, I decided to write a book about it. And from the beginning of the writing of the book and taking the course at the same time to the end was about a 7-year cycle. So having spent, I don't know, a couple of years off and on doing research, and then intensely living with that topic and developing it for 7 more years, out of the end of that pipe came The Creature from Jekyll Island. So you probably didn't need all that background.
No, it's a great frame around it.
Zero knowledge to a point where I finished the thing, and as you know, it's 600 pages thick, and I could have written another 600. In fact, you'll notice I stopped sort of in the middle of the history of it, right after the Federal Reserve was created and how they bailed out everything. But I was just coming into World War II at that time in the history, and I thought, this is 600 pages already. Nobody's going to read this, and if people don't get the story at the end of 600 pages, another 600 is not going to make any difference.
That's
so
true.
I wrapped the story up, and that's how it all came.
Well, really, it's 3 or 4 books in one volume.
It is.
You cover chunks. You can break it down. Just treat each section as a separate book. Now, Jekyll Island is it's interesting. I'm kind of fixated on a Latin phrase the Romans used to use, nomen est omen, or names are destiny. You think about Jekyll, immediately the public imagination thinks Jekyll and Hyde. So Jekyll is a kind of he's the benign doctor who helps people, and it's all wonderful for their good. But really, behind Jekyll is Hyde. There's something to this. You believe that the creation of the Federal Reserve from 1910 until its official signing in 1913 has been not a boon but a bust that's led to all levels of corruption. It's a tool of totalitarianism. It's really the main engine of inflation. Maybe start from there.
Well, that's it. Yeah, there were a lot of things about the Fed that were very alarming when you really got to understand it. And I remember when I was giving public presentations on it, I see if I can remember the quotation from the ancient philosopher from Phrygia, ancient kingdom of Phrygia. His name was Epictetus. And if I remember it correctly, Epictetus said, appearances are of 4 kinds. Things either are as they appear to be, or they neither are nor appear to be, or they are not, and yet appear to be, or they are, but do not appear to be. Now, it's all very confusing, and the reason I chose that quote, is to highlight the fact that what we're talking about can be very, very confusing, but it's deliberately so. Because once you get past all of the language and start looking at the principles involved, it's just as simple as that can be. They're creating money out of nothing, or actually worse than nothing, they're creating it out of debt. And they're charging interest on it. Any questions? This is it. This is the scam. So scams are usually very simple, but in order to be successful, they have to be dressed up to seem very complicated so that people can't understand them.
Yeah, only the specialists. Yeah, only the specialists can. The elites will explain it all for you.
Yeah, and don't ask too many questions. Just Now, if you want to join us and go to school and get your degree and get a good job in a bank or whatever, fine. But otherwise, just be content with the short answers. Well, actually, the real short answer is simply, as I said, it's a scam.
Another word you've used for the Federal Reserve is cartel, which makes people think of, Medellin, Colombia drug cartels or something. What's the true definition of a cartel, and how does it apply to the Fed?
Well, a cartel is a very simple structure. It's a business structure in which competing business enterprises join together. They still remain independent, but they join together to agree not to compete, so that they act as one, and therefore they can consolidate their whole industry and eliminate competition. So if you can control a whole industry and everybody involved they will compete with each other, but they will agree not to compete on price or on certain business practices or anything of significance that would benefit the customer or the buyer. And they'll compete on advertising, slogans, and all those things. And then they sit around tables and they decide that, okay, we get North America, you get South America, and we're not going to compete. Those are your territories. Somebody else gets Asia and so forth. Oh, you produce tractors, we'll produce automobiles. And through this process, they either agree not to compete or they share patents and processes. We saw a lot of that going on prior to World War II with the creation of the IG Farben cartel, the largest, probably still the largest cartel of all history in Germany. And the Farbindustrie, IG Farben, interesting Gemeinschaft Farbindustrie, whatever. I'm sure I murdered the pronunciation of the German on that. But it simply means a community of interest. It's a bunch of corporations, and it started in the dye stuffs industry where they made dyes for clothes. And then it went into medicinals and into armaments, explosives, and things that can blow things up and kill people. And it became a huge cartel, still is. And they joined partnerships with Standard Oil of New Jersey. And here we have this German cartel joining with the American cartel. And by the time the Federal Reserve shows up at the turn of the last century, the world was cartelized. I mean, it was well on the road, let's put it that way. All the major businesses either were totally cartelized, working together like that, or in the process. And so the Federal Reserve System, when it was created in the secret meeting on Jekyll Island in Georgia, what they did was to create a banking cartel in America, just like the oil cartel and the pharmaceutical cartel and all the rest. So what we have is a cartel agreement between all the banks. And the agreement was written by the banks, so you can be sure it was to their best interest. And they repackaged it and sent it back to Washington, D.C., and it was sold to the American people as an act of Congress. It was actually a cartel agreement, but they took an imaginary eraser and removed the word cartel agreement from the top, and they wrote in the Federal Reserve Act. They voted it into law. And that's in simple terms, that's basically what happened.
Who were some of the people on that train that offloaded at the end of the train in secret?
Yeah, well, they were the representatives of the greatest banks in the United States, with liaison with some of the other banks. I had to get my list out and look. I always have trouble remembering them, but of course,
the Warburg brothers, the Warburg brothers.
Yes, and. Let's see. First of all, there was the Morgan banks were represented. The Rockefeller banks were represented. Kuhn Loeb and Company was a investment firm in the U.S., and Kuhn Loeb was represented, and they had contacts with the Rothschilds and the Warburgs in Europe. So when you add all of those things together, there were only 6 men there, but the financial interests that they've represented, the banks and the insurance companies, which they also controlled because they sat on the board of directors. You know, they provided the credit so the insurance companies could buy or back up the insurance policies and so forth. It was an amazing, and still is an amazing, interlocking directorate. So anyway, all of the major banks and investment houses in the United States with their contacts with Europe were represented, and according to the observers at the time, it represented about 1/4 of the wealth of the entire world. Now, you've got the list. I can tell you're looking at it there.
Yeah, I'm just Senator Aldrich.
Senator Aldrich, of course, yeah. Mm-hmm.
So these are...
He was head of the banking committee that drafted the bill. Mm-hmm.
So on that train represented the 1%ers whose monetary wealth is wildly out of proportion. No wonder they wanted to do it in secret. I mean, God forbid, if the wrong people learned that these guys were cooking this up, would have probably had a different outcome. Which brings us... Sorry, go ahead.
Well, I was going to say it was 1% of the 1%.
Right. Yeah, that's the Pareto principle on steroids, the super ultra uber rich, right?
Uber rich, yeah. Mm-hmm.
And secrecy is a note that comes up again and again. And this is something I learned from your work in introducing me to Carol Quigley, wheels within wheels, rings within rings. Very little of these plans are hatched in the light of day. It's almost always cloak and dagger. It's offline, off the grid, obviously by design.
Well, yeah, that's the definition of a conspiracy. We're not supposed to think about conspiracies today. We're supposed to think that although all of history has been driven by conspiracies, almost from Adam and Eve forward, we're supposed to think that now, today, although there's the greatest temptation for conspiracy, that they don't exist. So anybody who thinks that, well, that was a conspiracy, well, they've got a tinfoil hat or something, and we're supposed to believe that they just don't exist anymore. But what you just said is true. If you go to any courtroom in America, for sure, and if it's not just a traffic court, and serious cases are being tried, I don't know what their percentage is, but I'm going to guess that 20% at least of all those cases or more, maybe 30 or 40%, involve conspiracies of one kind or another. Conspiracy is the most common element of life, economic and political life in the world. So, and every major event of history, if you look at it carefully enough, you'll see that there are a lot of conspiracies involved with all of those events.
Yeah.
So naturally, if you're going to do something that you know would not be popular with the masses, so to speak, the people that you have to keep happy, you don't have to do much except keep them ignorant and keep them happy. Keep them whatever makes them happy, whether it's drugs or whether it's sports or whether it's dancing with the stars or whether it's, I don't know, you name it.
So funny.
Keep them happy and keep them ignorant and keep them paying their taxes and doing their job and, building things for you. Why, that's the ultimate goal. So if you want to do something like rob them of the product of their wealth, you don't want them to know what's going on. So you have to do things in secret. That's a simple thing.
It's so funny that you say Dancing with the Stars. That's the one show that I kind of use as an example of a distracted populace, almost bred in circuses.
It's not bred in circuses, but it's in the same category.
Yeah.
Distraction, fascination, blood games are the ultimate. And I think we're going to see some of that in our world today now, too.
Oh, yeah, I think so. I think the ground's been re-softened with the genre that arose in the 80s and 90s. I'm trying to think of the guy's name, Morton Downey Jr. and Geraldo Rivera, where people are throwing chairs at each other, and Maury Povich discovering, you are the father, and literal fights break out on stage, and to the delight of the audience.
The audience is delighted, more and more.
Yeah.
So human nature is not changing. It's been that way from the beginning. And we're all guilty of that. If we're driving down the freeway and we see a wreck at the side, we all slow down and gawk at it,
Yeah.
Those things fascinate us. There's something instinctive about it. Golly, that could have happened to us, So we're very interested in these things.
Yeah.
And the people who are running the show are very wise, and they're experts. They're scientists. They know how to engineer a public opinion, how to manipulate the mind, and it's become really a science now.
Yeah.
And they've tuned it very finely.
Are you familiar with Eddie Bernays?
Oh yes, Edward Bernays.
Yeah, I'm writing a book on isms, and I'm reading every Eddie Bernays book I can get my hands on. Talk about weaponized psychology. Of course, his uncle was better known as Sigmund Freud.
Right, yeah, he was the nephew, wasn't he?
Yes,
Sigmund
nephew.
Freud. Yeah. Well, I've only read his one book on propaganda. How many books does he have?
A half dozen or so. He's called
really?
the father of PR, which is a very interesting euphemism for what he did.
Yes.
We're talking about mass level persuasion and propagandization, and he doesn't hide it. It's embedded in the title of his book.
Yeah, he approaches it as a scientist. Yeah, this is the way the world is. It's kind of like Machiavelli. People think that Machiavelli was an evil person because he was talking about how to manipulate the masses, just like Bernays in a way. But he didn't advocate it. He said, look, this is the way it really is. Now, we didn't invent this, but you're the prince. And if you want to stay the prince and not be assassinated, you better do this, 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 and this, and so forth. And, oh, golly, I was almost on his side because I had to agree that is the way the world really is. And you've got to be realistic and defend yourself. But, of course, he takes it to the other side, which has become offensive with it. Take the initiative and not only protect yourself, but endanger others and manipulate things to take away their liberties. That's crossing the line.
Interesting. So you could call Machiavelli the ultimate realist, but who just overplayed the card. Yeah.
Overplayed the card. Well, he was looking for a job when he wrote that book. The prince he worked for was overthrown, and now he's out looking for somebody to take him in, pay his bills, and give him food and shelter. That's how it worked in those days. Yeah. And so he wrote this book, and he was out looking for a job. It was kind of like a resume,
I'm watching Hidden Agenda, which by some miracle of providence is still allowed to be seen on Amazon Prime, and it's a multi-part documentary. You're one of the presenters, and the one I'm doing now is narrated by a guy called Ronald Reagan on communism, and how communism and fascism, they're almost synonyms, right?
I would disagree with that. I would remove the word almost.
Okay.
They're totally the same.
Because this is another sort of psyops. We're trained to think of, well, fascism, that's Hitler. He was the far right. Socialism, communism, that's the far left. That was Stalin. But it's the Nazi Socialist Party. And when you begin to look closer at it, the narrative that we've been sold and taught is opposite to what is.
Yeah, that's true, and in fact, that you've just touched on the major weapon being used against the American people. I think, and people around the world today, and we're asked to choose up between sides which appear to be opposites. I mean, they fight each other like the devil. Yeah. I mean, the communists and the Nazis fought each other to the death, but they weren't fighting over differences of opinion or ideology. They were fighting over dominance. Who is going to control? Which one of us is going to be the top dog? I mean, we both believe exactly the same thing, but we both can't rule. So it's got to be us or you. And that was what it was all about. There's no difference between Nazism, fascism, communism, socialism. All of these isms are just different words, different variants. There's some minor things like they have a different insignia and so forth. And with the communists, they use hatred and fear. And with the communists, they had to hate the rich. It was a class warfare. With the Nazis, they hated the Jews. They had to have somebody to hate. It was sort of the same because the Jews in those times had a lot of the money, and so they said those are the rich Jews. And so, but they had different hate targets. But other than that, everything was the same. And the underlying philosophy behind all of those is something called collectivism, and that's one of the things that I've been trying to get across to the best of my ability for quite a while, is that let's quit talking about socialism, communism, fascism, all those things, liberalism, left wing, right wing, Republican, Democrat, all these things are false alternatives. And look at underneath all of that, you've got two ideas. One is individualism and the other is collectivism. If we talk about those things, then all the confusion clears up.
Are they fire and ice, collectivism and individualism? Oil and
water? Are they what?
Fire and ice. Can't really happily coexist. They're opposed.
No, they cannot. They're absolute opposites. Yeah. Yes, it's like up and down.
Yeah.
Because in fact, I have on our site, one of our sites is called Freedom Force International, and I have a kind of a white paper on that thing. It's called The Chasm. I encourage anybody interested in this, go to freedomforceinternational.org and look up The Chasm. And I identified, I believe in that paper, I've got 7 principles in which collectivism and individualism are exactly 180 degrees out of sync with each other.
Mm-hmm. I'm going to write that down. In fact, all the things that Mr. Griffin and I are talking about can be found in a link at patrickcoffin.media if you're listening for the first time. Just want to linger a little bit on the notion of conspiracy theory, because it's the overarching thing we're talking about. I understand that a CIA operation in the late 40s and 50s called Operation Magpie coined this phrase, conspiracy theorist, as a way to ritually shame and tag someone who has a counter-narrative or has uncovered evidence that exposes official stories in their, fallacious nature. And it's used to great effect. A lot of the people that I interview, if you do a Google search, that's one of the first things that they're called. A pseudoscientist, a conspiracy theorist. But as you say, linguistically, conspire is Latin for breathe together. There are things known as plots that people behind the scenes, because they don't want to be exposed, they do plan and plot together. It doesn't have to be Flat Earth Society conclusions to see that history is driven by decisions made by powerful oligarchs.
Yeah, in fact, the real Flat Earth Society are the people that scoff at conspiracies, because they're, well, as I said before, one of the most common experiences in our lifetime. And it's everywhere, unfortunately, but it's everywhere. Mm-hmm. So, yeah, I don't know whether that phrase was created by a CIA department or not. It makes no difference, but it probably was, because that's one of the things that they do there. Their propaganda department, they don't call it that. I don't know what they have a name for it, but it's public communications or something like that. It's a very important factor in our modern world, because as everybody knows, that in the old days, when you conquered a country or a people, you did it primarily with force of arms. You did it with swords, and then with bullets, and then bombs, and then all of that. But then, starting with about the French Revolution and the American Revolution, all of a sudden the major weapons of conquest changed from hardware to software. Software meaning ideas. And it was the idea of freedom, equality, fraternity, justice, these things that humans have built into them, an attraction to all of these positive instincts. They have negative instincts too, but the upper side of our spirit and our mind, we reach upward for these things, the justice and freedom and all those things. And so the people, the would-be conquerors, didn't give up the idea, we got to have a better sword than the other guy, or more guns, or whatever it is. And that's always the fallback. But they've learned that the best way to conquer a people is through their minds, so that they will be content with their conquest. They'll think, well, it's for the greater good of the greater number, or whatever if you can convince a person that their slavery is for their own good or for the betterment of everybody else, like wear a mask so nobody else gets an invisible COVID virus that doesn't really exist, but as long as you think it does, you're conquered by your mind. And you don't even need a virus either, by the way. You just convince people that that's real. So ever since then, that's been the major weapon. So all the governments of the world have buildings full of people that do nothing but dream up slogans and arguments and situations which will twist the thinking of good people into conclusions that are bad for them.
And they really do sympathize with their oppressors. I mean, I just interviewed Dr. Scott Hahn on the origin of the Stockholm Syndrome. The people who were captive in Stockholm, Sweden, I believe it was 1975, they began to complain about the oppressive police force that liberated them. They argued on behalf of them. So there's this thing, going back to your point about human nature is static, and it's basically fallen or at least cracked. We have a propensity to internalize the commands of our oppressors, believing that they're acting for our good. We have to trust them. I have to put my facial diaper on because I don't want to kill grandma.
Yeah, and I believe that aspect, that undermining of our own reliance and our own judgment and our own feeling of independence is gradually weakened by other psychological factors, which is confusion and fear, and maybe nutritional deficiency, lack of sleep, but especially confusion and fear and uncertainty over a long period of time tends to wither and atrophy those feelings of self-reliance and independence, so that you grasp for somebody else to help you.
That's right.
It's like a person that on the computer, something goes wrong with the computer, and say, oh, darn. Well, how do you fix that? Another person says, oh, there it goes again. Oh, I'll call somebody and get them to fix it,
Yeah.
And I think you can, in fact, I'm sure you can inculcate that feeling of dependence and inability to take care of yourself over a period of time by conditioning them with external conditions. And I'm sure I have seen it done, actually.
Yeah, sure. True or false question for you. The imposition of masks and social distancing and the emptying of hospital wards for crowds that never arrived are designed to make people feel guilty about standing for their freedoms and independence from it.
Well, the reason I'm hesitating is because I have no problem with everything up until the last few words. I know it's designed and all of that, and it's false. It has no scientific basis for it. I have no problem with that, because that's easy to demonstrate. If people just look at the evidence, they don't want to see it, so they go, it can't be true, so they won't look at it. But it's documented beyond any question. Now we get to the motive part. Why are they doing that? Is it because they want to take away our freedom, or is it because they want to make a bazillion dollars off of the selling of the medical products that fall in the wake of that? Or is it because they're just following what they're told to do and don't really have any understanding, or a mixture of those things? I think different people involved in the system have different reasons for going along with it and enforcing it. But I think at the very top, places in the hidden chambers in the United Nations where big decisions are made, not in public, and at the World Economic Forum, and in the Council on Foreign Relations and the Bilderberg Group and all of these secret structures, I'm sure that the attack on personal freedom is a major objective. Because as long as people are free, their absolute power over the people is always subject to being removed. I mean, they can be deposed. But once people have no freedom whatsoever, and they're dependent on their masters even for food or water to drink, there is very little chance that there's going to be any kind of a revolt, because people can't afford it. They'll die. They won't have food and water to drink or shelter. So I think at the very top of the structure, the idea of denying freedom of choice, freedom of movement, freedom of speech, all of those things is no doubt a very high priority.
So the people, the oligarchs, the collectivists that created the crisis can then arrive like the cavalry with the solution. And the solution is the vaccine.
Yes. It's kind of smart, It's I'm joking when I say this, but when I finally figured out what they did at the Federal Reserve, how they created money out of literally nothing of their. They had no skin in the game. It was just a process. They convert debt into money, and then they charge interest on nothing. I remember thinking, golly, why didn't I think of that,
Yeah, right. You're in the wrong business.
What a deal this is.
Yeah.
So, now I'm applying the same humorous, not so funny actually, but idea. It's a joke. Yeah, why don't we all enslave people by convincing them it's for their own good? That's how it works.
So the better end of the deal is to not borrow from a bank, it's to start a bank.
Yeah. Well, if you remember in the very first page of my book, I had that little summary. It was
from Punch.
Editorial really, from Punch and Judy.
It's hilarious, yeah.
Yes. Yeah, that's exactly how it ends. Yeah, maybe we should, I shouldn't have my money in a bank, I should start a bank. And of course.
Have you noticed how evidence of the injuries and the many significant problems caused by this vaccine are quickly deleted? You can't discuss them. You can't share them. Whether it's
they disappear if they ever show up at all.
Right.
I would be very surprised if we're hearing about more than 1 or 2% of them. I'm sure they're everywhere, but they'll never make it into the mainstream.
Right. Well, this is, of course, every new invention comes with a double-edged sword. On the one hand, the invention of the modem and the availability of the internet has caused, it's the source of censorship, and there's oligarchic control from Silicon Valley. On the other hand, we can still connect, and we can still communicate from our separate silos, as it were. So there's a curse and a blessing involved.
The window is not completely closed, and that's good. And I think as long as we have a modicum of freedom to do what we're doing now, we can overcome all of the censorship. But of course, they know that too, and they're working around the clock trying to narrow that window of opening and get it. Finally, they want to close it down so that programs like this just cannot happen. And technically they can, but it's a race against the clock. I think people are waking up too fast now for that to be successful. And they know they've got to close this up really fast, or else the cat's going to get out of the bag.
Is collectivism a synonym for communism?
Communism is a variant of collectivism. So in that sense, yes. Communism is collectivism. Now, collectivism isn't communism because communism is a variant. It has certain characteristics to it. But the ideology, the principles are all the same. Communism, it has its own set of heroes, Marx and Engels and Stalin and Lenin, whereas fascism has Mussolini, and communism in China has its Mao, and so forth. And they're different slogans, but getting all that aside and look at what they believe in, like, where do rights come from, which is superior, the group or the individual? And you go down that list of 7 things, which I was talking about, they're in total agreement on all of them.
Is socialism a ground softening on behalf of communism, or is socialism a synonym for communism?
Socialism is a variant of communism, just like, a variant of collectivism, just as communism is a variant. But now when you get into the communist literature, the communists make a distinction between socialism and communism. I mean, they do. But the distinction is one of progression or one of degree. They teach that communism is merely the path. I'll get it straight here. Communism is the result of socialism. Socialism is the path to communism. You have to have socialism first. And then that'll be a long period of time where society is perfected, all the evil people like you and I are eliminated, and our brains are washed, and nobody has greed anymore, nobody is selfish, they all think about the group first, and so forth. And then the state will wither away, Karl Marx said, and socialism then will become communism. Well, the principles, however, remain the same underneath both of them.
Well, Klaus Schwab, our superior, the founder CEO of the World Economic Forum, does not hide this. I've seen many of his propaganda videos, this smiling, shiny, happy people saying, in the future, you will have no property, you'll own nothing, and you'll be perfectly happy. I thought that people who couldn't own property were known as slaves.
Well, it used to be. Now, according to Schwab, they'll be happy citizens. They'll be free of the responsibility of property. The state will take care of that. Of course, Schwab is interesting from another point of view. He and guys like Fauci are the new breed of collectivists, where we call them technocrats. Now the emphasis is shifting away from elections and a politician. Now, instead of having that distinction of being elected by the people, now our leaders and our masters are science, and these are the priests of science. It's become almost like a religion, and these are the priests of science. But now we can't argue with it because science is behind it, you see. And but after you've got that little twist into it, all the rest of the principles remain, and the absence of private ownership of property is one of the elements that you find in all and all kinds of collectivism. So nothing has really changed, except now this emphasis of politicians are bad, but scientists are good.
That's right. In fact, politicians bow down to the same scientists that the media bow down to. Yeah. The white smock of the doctor is like the liturgical vestment of the new high priests.
They're the priests, exactly. Mm-hmm. And so that's been underway for quite a while, that development of technocracy. I don't really recall the dates, but I think it's been about 80 or 100 years now that has been growing as another variant of collectivism.
Klaus Schwab wrote a letter to the world. It's his January 1st epistle. I did a video on it recently on the Great Reset and his wish that 2021 be known as Year Zero. Now that immediately shocked me because one of my daughters is doing a big school project on the Cambodian genocide. And Year Zero is not a reference to the end of World War II. It's a reference to 1975 and the fact that Pol Pot called 1975 Year Zero, which ushered in one of the most bloodiest genocidal periods ever. So that Year Zero. So, you know, the hard left, the progressive collectivists, always overplay their card. There's always a kind of a note of obviousness that eventually emerges. Do you agree with that?
Oh, yeah, no doubt. And there are some people that believe that there's an occult element to that. I don't know if that's true or not, but it's intriguing to think that some of these people are part of an occult community where their belief system compels them to reveal their hand in a certain way. Otherwise, it's not fair.
Right. That's interesting.
You have to reveal yourself to your enemy, and therefore it's his fault for not resisting. See, now your conscience is clean because you gave him fair warning, and he was too stupid to know.
That's interesting.
I've heard that. I don't know that that's true, but it's intriguing to think about that.
I mentioned to you off the air, I've interviewed Harry Lorraine, who's not only the leading authority on memory tactics and remembering people's names and so on, but also a magnificent teacher of magicians. And he would say some magicians, they almost can't help themselves. If they're hiding a card, let's say they're palming a playing card, they're almost like giving it away by their body language, like, I'm really fooling you here, you know. So I never connected those.
Yeah, the ultimate confidence in your ability to complete your task. I suppose you see that in a cat that's maimed a mouse, and he plays with the mouse before he kills it. It's cruel, but they take the longest time to kill the mouse or the rat. They'll toy with it and pounce on it and chew on it and then let it go, and so forth. And it's I wonder sometimes if there's a certain trait like that hidden deep inside the human psyche as well.
After World War II, there was growing realization that there was literal, actual communist infiltration in many high levels of the United States government. And spearheading the fight against that was Senator Joe McCarthy. And if you look back at that era through the lens of what's being uncovered now, you begin to see that McCarthyism became a devil term to throw at people who wanted to expose these conspiracies, or you can call them plots. You've written a little bit about McCarthy as a kind of symbol of someone who's pointing out, look, the emperor here is naked. Even though you can say he indulged in some excesses or they didn't like his personal style, but they didn't refute him. They just went after the man and not what he was revealing. Does that make sense?
Yeah, it makes total sense. That I believe that's an accurate appraisal. McCarthy was vulnerable because of some personal traits, and he had some people in his entourage that probably he shouldn't have had, but all that stuff, that's secondary. The bottom line is that regardless of whether you like McCarthy as a person, he was 100% right. And nobody now can refute that. So we don't talk about whether he was right or wrong. We just talk about how bad it was that what he did. He was causing innocent people to lose their jobs and come under suspicion, and he was an evil person, and that's all you need to know. You don't have to ask whether he was right or wrong. Right. It was bad. So that's how they work on the human mind. we're back to Edward Bernays again.
Yes. I wanted to ask you about Black Lives Matter as a hashtag, as a Soros-funded movement, definitely lockstep with Antifa. Now, there's another example of the far left revealing itself. It engages in overtly, obviously fascist tactics in the name of attacking fascism. We know now.
It engages in obviously collectivist tactics. The fascists, the communists, the Nazis, Black Lives Matter, all collectivist groups are capable of those things because it fits perfectly with their ideology.
You mentioned the occult, possible occult side to this. I interviewed a black attorney, a radio host named Alexander Hamilton, Abraham Hamilton, and he has audio of Patrisse Cullors, one of the foundresses of Black Lives Matter, saying not only are they trained Marxists, but that they summoned spirits of the dead to launch this in 2015 and 2016, before there was a hashtag, before any of the riots and so on. So we're talking 4 years before the George Floyd explosion. That's kind of creepy, seeing that people admitting witchcraft and contacting the spirits of the dead.
Yeah, there's quite a bit of that surfacing now, and I used to have, a lot of doubts about that prevailing in our modern society. My doubts are pretty much gone now. I am now convinced that it is real. Now, the extent to which it is real, I have no idea. But I'm convinced that it is real and that there are people that, in their minds at least, are practicing devil worship, witchcraft, or whatever turns them on, and I'm sure they get the sense of power from that. Now, it might even be a little more technical than it. It could be, that the elite are using that to ensnare people, get them in compromising positions, get video of them participating in ceremonies.
Yes.
Now, just like pedophilia, you can ensnare somebody into an act of pedophilia. They could be drugged, or what doesn't make any difference. And you've got the goods on them now, and you own that person, especially if they're in a political career.
Yeah.
Because the minute you do not do as you're told, you are destroyed. So I'm suspicious. Now, again, I have to be careful. When I talk about things I know and I can prove, I'll say so. I cannot prove what I just said, but it just fits the pattern so perfectly.
In Tragedy and Hope, Carol Quigley, I want to ask you about Quigley in just a moment. His assessment, as I'm reading it so far, is that the rings within rings, it does end up in a center ring. It does end up most probably in a single individual who's the ultimate great Oz behind the curtain. Am I oversimplifying that? No,
I don't think you're oversimplifying. That's always been a big question as to how large that inner circle is. I mean, the absolute inner circle, the hot spot. Some people think it's got to be one person. I tend to believe that because of what I've seen in my own life experience in organizational work. I've never seen three people or two people even without one being dominant. And especially if you have a task to perform that is huge in scope. It requires a lot of responsibility. Somebody's going to have to take the responsibility to make the hard decision. And if you don't have either that or an odd number of people so the decision can be made 2 to 1 or something like that, the organization won't succeed. It has to be boiled down to usually one person, even if it's one throwing the vote one way or the other. Usually one person has to make the decision.
That's interesting.
We can cut to the chase and get on with the task.
It almost apes legitimate government. It certainly apes the church, where you have Jesus Christ the head and the church as the body. You have a president and a populace, even a president with a council. The buck does stop with one person. It's not run by a junta, right? There has to be sort of a singular.
In the corporate world, of course, the president is not the top guy. I mean, he's the executive, and of course, now we're talking about politics. That's the way it used to be in the United States. The president merely took orders from the Senate, and he did what he was told by the legislative branch. Well, that's history, but anyway. even in the corporation, there's usually the chairman of the board or a hidden power group of some kind that may not show up on the organizational chart, but it exists. Take the Federal Reserve, for example. Those are all the member banks, and they have votes. They have stock and so on, but they can't really vote for anything. It's a power play. The banks with the most influence, with the most deposits, and the people involved that have the most respect and control so many other organizations as well, have political influence, and maybe have hitmen. Who knows how these things work? I know one thing: it doesn't work the way you see it in the movies. It's something a little more efficient than that.
Frank Capra directed a movie just before he went off to World War II to make movies for the U.S. Army. The movie's called Meet John Doe. I'm going to put a link into patrickcoffin.media. His screenwriter, Robert Riskin, they wrote 14 movies together. That was their last collaboration. And it really anticipates Saul Alinsky collectivist crowd manipulation. I'm not sure if you've seen it. It's starring Barbara Stanwyck and Gary Cooper. It's a very, very instructive, it's like a manual to what we're seeing today. Came out in 1941.
I'd like to see it.
Yeah.
Came out in 1941.
Yes. Yeah, it was the film he made before It's a Wonderful Life. So before the war and after the war. But it's about a collectivist oligarch who wants to take over everything. In fact, I'm going to be writing something about this. A movie in the 70s, I want to say 1976, came out called Network, starring Peter Finch and Robert Duvall. It's sort of the anti-Meet John Doe. It's very cynical, very kind of death-worshipping nihilism. But that's the opposite of what Frank Capra was trying to communicate. I wanted to ask you about something about which I know nothing. It's been explained to me 100 times. It's been broken down into the 4th grade level, and I'm still flummoxed by it, and that is cryptocurrency, things like Bitcoin. On the one hand, people say it's a tool of the New World Order, and it's a collectivist hoax to get you to buy into some international currency. On the other hand, it's been described as the antidote to the New World Order, that this is something the government can't touch. It's hack-proof or hacker-proof. What are your thoughts on cryptocurrency?
I'm trying to think of how I can condense it down to something meaningful, because my thoughts on cryptocurrency have changed from my first exposure to it. And I think most of the people that are in the crypto movement and are considered to be the gurus, I think if you talk to them, they would probably say their thoughts have changed also as we've seen the technology evolve. Now, how has it changed? We all know that it was first promoted by people, or by the argument, let's just say, that this was a way to get free of government control and get free of the oppression of the banks and that kind of thing. As it could not be captured. You could always have anonymity, privacy. In other words, they could never take your stuff away from you and so forth. Yeah. Now, that argument is not, it's still, you see it there. It hasn't changed any, but it's kind of hollow now, because we also see the development of other technologies along with it that do allow for the banks and the governments to throw the switch. Now, they can't very well turn off the blockchain, but they can determine how you apply the blockchain, whether you can use the blockchain effectively. I'll just give you one example. Yeah. In the beginning, all the exchanges, all the swaps of currency, cryptocurrency from one person to another, went directly peer-to-peer. They were made live with no problem until you got a couple of million people doing it. And then we discovered, I don't say we, I mean it was discovered, that the blockchain was too small for that. It started to slow down. And I don't know what it is today, but I think that it quite often will take 20 minutes or an hour or longer to affect a blockchain transaction. Because there's such high volume and the blockchain is too small for it. Now, they could have, I'm told, they could have increased the size of the blockchain to speed it up. but they chose not to do that. Strange choice. Well, I think the reason they chose not to do that is because that was a stimulus for what they call side chains. It forces people to make transactions not directly peer-to-peer, but directly with a merchant, like, let's say, Sears Roebuck or
like a cyber PayPal.
Or cyber PayPal account. And all of a sudden, now you're outside of the peer-to-peer system, and you're right back where you started from. You've got third-party intervention and control. And in order to make it work today, you have to get outside of that peer-to-peer and go into side chains so that you can get instantaneous transactions. They don't even have to know who you are, but those can be turned on and off. And they can, and I think that is why you have so much enthusiasm now for things like government cryptocurrencies and the big corporations, Walmart and so forth. They got their own side chain, I imagine. And as long as they can accumulate a whole day's worth of transactions and net them out and make one blockchain transaction at the end of the day, I mean, you and I don't know any difference, but they might have to wait half an hour or an hour for that transaction every day, but that's no big deal. $100 million done in half an hour, no big deal. So now that, I don't know if I'm going down the right track, but I now think that it's naive to continue to hang on to that belief that, cryptocurrencies are going to protect you from bank and government controls. Having said that, now then what would those controls be? And I've already given away my thoughts on that. It's an on and off switch. And if they get rid of all cash currency, which they're planning to do and probably will, because we have no control over it, the banks will say, nope, no more currency. That's it. So you're then forced to either deal with get out your old supply of silver dimes and quarters and half dollars and so forth, and try and do, get the old currency working again. Or you feel, there you go.
A dead president on a piece of paper.
President. But you can't get anything out of it except more paper. Of course, not even that coming up. You won't even get paper anymore. You'll get digital units. But if you're not obedient, you won't get those either. So I come to the short answer of your question, which is I think that currencies, number one, cryptocurrencies are here to stay, definitely. And I think that we've got to get into them and learn how to use them. And for a while, those who speculate in it are going to do very well. They're going to make a huge amount of money. But they could also lose that money because it's all ether. You can't put it in your mattress. If they pull down the website, for example, which they could do for 2 days or a week or even a month, cause havoc in society, you won't be able to use your crypto. Of course, you won't be able to use your bank card either. I mean, everything will be down, but your crypto will be just as worthless as the fiat money. And on and on and on. I don't think that the crypto world is being realistic about continuing to tell people how safe it's going to be from government and bank interference.
Well, we're back to our original statement about the invention of the modem has been blessing and curse. Marshall McLuhan wrote a lot about this, about media. He said media is an extension of man. So radio is an extension of the tongue, the computer is the extension of the nervous system, the pedal or the horse stirrup are an extension of the human foot. And so crypto, it's a double-edged sword. It's not one big blessing and a protection against oligarchic control, because it has the potential to be a tool against us, even though it's sold to us as an instrument of our liberation.
So I think that this overconfidence in technology is being used against us. We don't understand technology. We don't realize that it's a counter warfare in many cases. For every new development that comes along, look at all the viruses and things that people use to hack your computer. Well, it doesn't take long, and they've got an anti-hack in. You can buy that and put it on your computer. And next month they got a new one that takes advantage of the exploitation in that one, and it just goes on and on and on. And finally, you get to the point, well, we don't need that stuff anymore anyway. We've got a whole new attack over on this side. So technology, I think you said it well. It's a double-edged sword, like so many other things.
The language of virus, I don't know if it came from the darkened mind of Bill Gates or not, but now, of course, with transhumanism and the Great Reset and Klaus Schwab's, what he calls the Fourth Industrial Revolution, which is the literal, in his words, I'm quoting him now, so don't believe me, believe him, the fusion of the human mind with artificial intelligence. It's already underway. And so the vaccine becomes not so much an inoculation against a real virus that can cause you harm, but it's a form of a computer download. Just with Microsoft, you have to keep downloading new systems.
Mm-hmm.
I don't know how many jabs people are supposed to take now. The Moderna and the AstraZeneca and the Johnson & Johnson and the Pfizer all have different protocols for their vaccines. But they certainly seem to be treating the human body as a kind of operating system that they are editing, that they are quote-unquote improving and protecting. Am I making sense?
I think you're right on target. Yeah, it's and also we can look at it not only as a as a operating system and a technological challenge, but you could look at it as a market. The whole pharmaceutical industry has developed a great a business model, and that is that you don't cure a disease. That would be stupid.
Yeah.
To cure the disease, then you've just gotten rid of your market. So the idea is to perpetuate the disease, but to keep it under control so that the patient doesn't die. He's always sick from it and needing more and more medication so that you can sell him more and more product every year, every 6 months, every month, maybe every week.
Yeah.
The idea is to get that economic cash flow coming in from the sale of meds and vaccines and so forth. And they'll just keep revving it up until finally the human body can't take it anymore. And I suppose when they start killing more people than they can sustain, keeping on the cash flow model, then they'll back off a little bit and find that delicate balance between killing the patient and keeping them sick.
That's right. Yeah. Enter the new wave of pro-euthanasia laws around the world that serves that goal.
I'd hate to see those written. I'm sure it'll have an economic factor. This person can't afford these meds, so therefore we can't save him.
Well, that's moving toward the Chinese communist social credit system. They're already starting it over here. Which websites do you watch? You can't present your vaccination card to the airline? Sorry, you're going to have to rent a horse or something. So that kind of soft totalitarianism is already beginning. I want to end with Red Pill Expo and Red Pill University and what you've got going there. But I wanted to ask you about Carroll Quigley. I mentioned him, author of The Anglo-American Establishment and Tragedy and Hope. For folks uninitiated, Carroll Quigley was a professor of history at Princeton, ended up for many years at Georgetown, and kind of the official stenographer or historian of secret societies, the most famous of his proteges being William Clinton. Is that a fair thumbnail? You know an awful lot more about Quigley than I do.
Well, that's a great thumbnail. Yeah, you hit all the hot spots anyway. Yes, he was the unofficial historian of, unabashedly and self-admittedly, is the most successful and long-term conspiracy of all history. It exists today, according to Quigley, who wrote the history of it.
Yeah.
And so anybody who reads Tragedy and Hope or the Anglo-American Experiment, is it?
Establishment, I think.
Establishment, yeah. Put those two books together, you've got the history of the greatest conspiracy of all time as still underway today. So, I think it was a very good summary. Clinton was a well-known protege. I'm sure there were others.
Yeah.
And out of that understanding comes a better view of things like the Rhodes Scholarship, because the conspiracy, by the way, just for the sake of your listeners, if they don't already know it, it doesn't have a name. And it was founded by Cecil Rhodes, and they decided to not have a name because without a name, nobody could talk about it easily.
Yeah.
And that would help to preserve the secrecy. We know a lot about it today because when Cecil Rhodes died, there was a guy by the name of William Stead who wrote a book called The Last Will and Testament of Cecil Rhodes. He was the administrator of the Rhodes estate. And he wrote in amazing, frank detail about what the money went to. And it was a huge amount of money, one of the wealthiest men of the world. None of that, to my knowledge, went to his family or his heirs.
I was going to say his dog didn't get it.
Dog didn't get it. It all went to the establishment of the secret society. for the lack of a better name, I call it the Rhodesian Society. Mm-hmm. And so once you understand, wow, there's no conspiracy, woo, here it is right there. Yeah. And they brag about it, and Professor Quigley thought very highly of it. He was not a member. He said, I was not actually a member of this group, but I was invited by them to write their history. And I was given free access to all their private papers. So if you're looking for proofs of a conspiracy, mm-hmm. you got to read Quigley. If you can, his books are even thicker than mine.
Yeah, yep. Back to Harry Lorraine. If you want to keep a magic secret, publish it in a book.
And a big, thick one at that.
Yeah, the bigger the better, the more cover. Yeah. And perhaps Professor Quigley saying he wasn't a member is code for that he was a member.
It could be. Mm. It could be. Although, I don't know if there's even an although on that. Frankly, I hadn't even thought about that. Mm. But why wouldn't he say he was a member? I don't know. It could be. Yeah. It makes no difference.
Yeah, that part that's moot. But one thing we see today, and I think Quigley's work and your commentary on it sheds a lot of light on front groups and proxy organizations that literally don't know who the puppet master is behind that one. Mm-hmm. Rings within rings within rings. So the outer level ring, which most people think of as, pro-Trump, anti-Trump, pro-Biden, anti-Biden. Back then it was, it was Bush, Hillary. Then before that it was Nixon, Humphreys, and so on. That's more level one thinking. That's not where the real meat is, right?
No, that's the outer ring.
The outer ring.
Yeah, the political parties are really about as far out on the ring structure as you can get, and that has huge population. That involves almost everyone, and it involves pretty good control over the actions of their members, because people who identify with party politics, they're pretty committed to following the decisions of their leaders. Boy, they wouldn't dream of going against their leaders. Mm-hmm. And it's amazing. It's an amazing phenomenon, because I'm a Democrat or I'm a Republican and my grandpappy was whatever it was, and I'm not going to change. I'd be like betraying my family. Yeah. And when, well, of course, that's not our topic, but when you compare what both of these parties stand for in terms of principles, the big issues such as national sovereignty. Are we going to remain a free, independent nation, or are we going to be absorbed into the United Nations? Yeah. What about our money supply? Is that going to remain fiat money? Or are we going back to real money? That kind of thing. And now it comes to the COVID thing. Are we all on board for that? The three biggest issues of all time. And there's absolutely no disagreement between those issues on either party. In fact, not even any discussion. Discussion is not allowed.
That's right. So
that is the implementation of Quigley himself, who wrote. You're familiar with his work, so you know what I'm going to say. There was one page that you might as well had a flashlight on it, just lit up when you come to it. It says, "How do we control people and give them the right to vote at the same time, and let them think that they're participating in their own political destiny?"
Right.
He says, it's simple. We just have two political parties. Let them choose up sides. We run them both.
Right.
And let them fight it out, back and forth. They can throw the rascals out from time to time, but always the major policies will never change. Mm-hmm. There's the Quigley formula. It's right there.
Yeah, and as long as the delegates sing and believe "Happy Times Are Here Again,"
mm-hmm. and yell and scream at each other and hate each other, mm-hmm. and you're given a choice of who do you want to be? You want to be a Nazi or a commie? Come on, hurry up! We got to have an election coming up.
Yeah, that's right. That's right. Tell me about Red Pill University and your Red Pill Expo events.
Okay, I have to give you a lot of pauses because these are all big topics. How do I condense it down? I'll try it this way. A long time ago, Patrick. Mm-hmm. We created an organization called Freedom Force International. And that was supposed to be like the inner group, the people that were really aware, really understood about the deepest aspects that we're talking about, and even deeper than that. And so because we felt that any movement had to have these people to drive it, to make sure it doesn't get off track and go back around into the direction from which we are escaping.
A kind of a think tank?
A think tank, yeah. Mm-hmm. And so we did that, and we were having great success with it and all that, but it became clear that that wasn't enough. And that's when I went back and looked at this rings within rings that Cecil Rhodes created. By the way, he imitated Adam Weishaupt with that.
That's right, the founder of the Illuminati.
The Illuminati, yeah. So it wasn't original with him. But I went and looked at that and said, there's nothing wrong with that organizational structure.
Yeah.
I mean, that's actually a very smart move. I mean, that's the way societies are run, even if you don't plan it that way. Mm-hmm. There are always influencers at the center that are more influential than others, and influence always ripples out. So why not do what they did and plan it that way and design each level to be oriented to the special interests of people in that group. Mm-hmm. Always be the same. But the only thing is you mustn't hide it. Because although they hide it, I thought if we're going to imitate that, we must make it clear from the very beginning that that's what we're doing.
Yeah, so put it all in the front of the store.
In front of the store. Yeah. This is... if you want to get really involved, well, let's talk about Freedom Force. But if you want to get out there where the action is and we're on the right track, okay, we don't expect you to read 100 books. We don't expect to spend half your life going to seminars and plotting and scheming and trying, how are we going to work something out? Who's going to do this? How do we raise the money? No, we don't. If you don't want to get involved in that, but you want to help out, okay, this is for you, and so forth. And so I got to thinking about that. That's pretty smart. These guys have figured it out. So I thought we needed an outreach program around our inner circle of Freedom Force. And I looked for something. What could it be? And the idea suddenly just struck me one day, red pill. Yep. Red pill. Not everybody, but most people are familiar with the Matrix, the movie. They know about the meme, take the red pill, man, and see reality. Yeah. Break out of the illusion. Yeah. And I thought, it's kind of trivial, it's kind of pop culture, but it's accurate.
Yeah, it does nail it.
So let's try it.
Yeah.
So we put on our first Red Pill Expo in 2017, and it was a smashing success. And we thought, by golly, we never had a success like this before with Freedom Force because that was too dry, too serious. But the Red Pill, that would kind of pop, everybody thought, oh yeah. And we had very serious topics and nothing really changed except the framework in which we were presenting our information. So we knew we had come up with the right idea. So we've had a series of Red Pill Expos, and they've each built upon the success of the other. The last one was back in October, and we had it on Jekyll Island, of all places. Mm-hmm. And it was a smashing success. So the next one, by the way, I'll do a little plug. Yeah. We've just decided it's going to be in Rapid City, South Dakota.
Okay.
That's only about a 30-minute drive from the National Monument, Mount Rushmore.
Oh, that's fitting.
We chose we chose South Dakota because that's one of the states where they haven't gone crazy with all of this social distancing and all this nonsense. And they also, by the way, have about the lowest rate of COVID without all of this stuff.
Yeah, that's a good thought experiment right there. How do you explain that? How do you explain the non-school lockdown in Sweden, a country of 10 million where 0 students died, and to this day people don't wear masks by and large in Sweden?
Yeah. Oh, well, we won't talk about that.
We won't. No. That's these are wrong thoughts.
Yeah, these are wrong thoughts, exactly. So anyway, then we decided finally to round this out is that the Red Pill Expos were so effective and such a great tool to cause people to become awakened to the reality that we had to do it all year long. We couldn't just do it once or twice a year. I mean, history is moving before our eyes so rapidly. Mm-hmm. So we thought, how about a Red Pill University, which would be like Red Pill Expo, only all year long and online. So with that, we launched that, and that's been operating now for about 2.5 years, and is growing very rapidly. And it's mostly a communication center, and our next step is to build campuses, local campuses in every county in the United States, and outreach to other parts of the world as well, so we can have boots on the ground in every community, like our opponents do. Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. They don't do this. What they've accomplished hasn't been over the internet. They do it through organizations with live people meeting face to face in every community around the United States. We have to do that. So that's our next job, is to build these campuses. So in a nutshell, Patrick, that's it. We're on the track. We're making great progress. It's a race against the clock. So we need, if anybody on online. Here's this, and it sounds like it's interesting. I urge you to come to redpilluniversity.org. That's the place to start. And from there, you can explore all of the things I'm talking about.
Campuses in every county. See, I thought you were more ambitious.
Well, every city in some cases, of course.
Sure.
Like in Los Angeles, we should probably have about 5 or 6 of them.
Well, that back there's another analogy to Meet John Doe. You'll have to check out that movie because they're called John Doe clubs. And
oh, really?
Yes. Oh, there's a lot of parallels here to what Capra and Riskin were talking about in 1941 to what you're doing now with Red Pill.
Meet John Doe. Is that online?
It is online. The copy on Amazon is a little bit dark. The lighting is not great. Well worth the $10 or $12 for the DVD, which I own. Starring Gary Cooper and Barbara Stanwyck and Walter Brennan and Edward Arnold. Terrific movie. Very far-seeking impression. Huh? Yep, Walter Brennan, one of the few actors to win 4 Academy Awards.
Yeah, I knew Walter Brennan.
You did?
Yeah, personally. I've been in his house numerous times.
Interesting. Beautiful. Yeah. Walter Brennan, this is a quick sidebar. Walter Brennan and Edward Arnold, who plays D.B. Norton, the oligarch, both are buried within 100 yards of our late daughter Naomi in the San Fernando Cemetery in Los Angeles. So it's a kind of a special thing for me that providentially, they're there so close.
Yeah. Well, Brennan was quite an interesting guy. His wife too. She was whenever I think of her, she was the first person that told me about cold brew coffee. She used to cold brew her own coffee long before you could buy them in the store. Nobody even knew what that was. And they had a place in Camarillo, and then they had a ranch up in Oregon, I think it was.
Really?
I never saw.
And they were married a long time.
I'll tell you this story.
Yeah.
It's hard to. One of the reasons I met him is because I was recording some video commercials of him promoting Senator Goldwater for president. And that's when I discovered that Brennan couldn't read lines. He's an actor. He couldn't read lines. We had to do about 7, 8, 9, 10 takes to get him to read a line.
Really?
And yeah, I guess most of his stuff that he did, it was just ad lib in the movies. You give him a script, and it was terrible. Of course, he's a great movie star. He did great.
Who knew? Won Oscars.
Won an Oscar,
Goes to show
but
you.
Don't give him a script, man. I'll tell you.
Well, he was, as many of them back then were, married to his wife Ruth for decades, right?
Yeah, Ruth, right.
Beautiful, small world, but I wouldn't want to paint it, said Stephen, right?
No, yeah, those paintings of Reagan were quite interesting. Well, that was done. His son-in-law, wasn't it?
I'm not sure. I've interviewed Michael Reagan. That never came up.
Yeah.
Well, look, I'd love to. We could go at least 14 more hours. I wanted to get to Yuri Bezmenov. Maybe I'll have you back and induce you to do another set of deep dives in red pills. I've enjoyed our conversation very much, Ed.
Well, I have too. Yeah. Thank you.
All right.
So, Yuri. What about Yuri? He's
well, quickly, he was a Soviet defector and a very passionate, brave explainer of how it all works and what the enemy is really up to and what he did for so many years.
Yeah, the takeaway from Yuri, of course, a lot of people have seen his interview now on the internet, had a resurgence of interest and went viral. Here's a guy that was born into the privileged class, the elite class in the Soviet Union. His father was a general in the Soviet Army, big hero. And he was born into the privileged class. He's like the super wealthy. And everything he wanted was given to him. They recruited him into the KGB because they figured that's where he should be, with his great distinction, his bloodline, and so forth. So he was in the KGB, and his primary job for a long time was to hoodwink journalists from the West, the United States, France, India, also, not all the West. Any journalists that wanted to come to the Soviet Union and see what life was really like there, did they really oppress people, or did they have a great life there? Go and find out for themselves. Yuri's job was to meet them at the airport, to provide very nice transportation to the best hotel they had there in Moscow, to get them drunk as quickly as possible, give them the finest food, entertain them, drive them around, show them what they want to see. But what they didn't know is that every place they went was theater. It was staged just for them. It wasn't real. One of the places, for example, was a church, because all the journalists wanted is religion forbidden in the Soviet Union? Oh, no, said Yuri Bezmenov. That's silly. Of course. Oh, in fact, I'll take you to the cathedral. You want to see the cathedral? You go to see for yourself. Oh, yeah, I like that. In fact, I think there's a wedding going on. Well, there's a wedding going on. Every time there was a group of journalists, they had a wedding going on.
It's brilliant.
And the bride and the groom were actors. They got married several times a week.
What if they got tired of each other?
They couldn't stand each other. But they were getting married, and all the guests were there drinking champagne and dancing, and the orchestra was playing. And so the Soviet show was great. The journalists would write home, I just attended a Soviet wedding, and they put pictures up, and that's all propaganda about persecution of religion and so forth. They wanted to see what prisons were like. Oh, you want to see a prison? Okay. Well, we'll take you. There's one not too far from here. Where's the prison, comrade? Oh, it's out. Oh, yeah, we'll find it. They knew where there was a special prison just for journalists. The inmates ate well. They had clean quarters. They had nice, clean uniforms. They did a little bit of manual labor, and they were all happy. And this sort of thing. So it goes on and on. Yeah. And finally, Yuri got an assignment in India, and he was so horrified by what was happening in his country to his fellow Russians. He had conscience, and he said, I've got to get out of here at a great risk to his life, because if they had caught him, they would have executed him, probably tortured him, and then executed him. So he got out. He posed as a hippie. He put a wig on, I think, but he brought pictures with him. We saw him with a wig on. He took pictures out with him, and he blended in with a bunch of pot-smoking hippies, and they came back to I guess they went to Canada, as I recall, and then finally, long story. I ran into it because I read a blurb about his life and a statement he made in one of the congressional investigating committees, probably the House Committee on Un-American Activities. I thought, gee, this guy is interesting. I'd like to interview him. And I found a contact. I called him on the phone, asked him if he'd appear before our cameras. He said, sure. Yeah. So that's how it started. And he tells it exactly the way it is. By this time, he had learned that the FBI and the CIA were not interested in having him come to America. And he couldn't understand it. He was brokenhearted. He thought he would be welcomed, and he had a lot of information to deliver, but he found out that they treated him as though he was the enemy.
Why?
And, well, that was always a question. Why? And so everybody can answer that themselves. He couldn't answer it. He just couldn't answer it. He thought that it might be because our own agencies were infiltrated by Soviet operatives. But we've talked about that, and it came to the conclusion that it probably was because our own leadership at that time was trying to build bridges to the Soviet Union and did not want confrontation or anything negative in the public.
I think that's true.
And they were trying to avoid things like he was going to say.
Yeah, I think there's a strong analogy here with what happened in the Catholic Church from the 30s until the 60s. There's a woman you may have heard of named Bella Dodd.
I remember Bella Dodd, yes. Teacher.
Yeah, teacher, infiltrated, card-carrying member. She was a below-ground, then above-ground Communist Party member. Came back to the practice of her faith thanks to a guy who I consider my spiritual father, Archbishop Fulton J. Sheen, himself an expert on Soviet literature and communism. And she said in the early 30s that she trained and deployed, I should say, about 1,100 seminarians as communists to infiltrate the Catholic Church. So fast forward 30 years later, you've got the Second Vatican Council that refuses to talk about communism. You won't read a single line about it.
No.
So it was called Ostpolitik, right? Ostpolitik. We want to be friendly. We want to build bridges, as you say.
Mm-hmm.
And I think Yuri Bezmenov dropped into that kind of spirit of the age.
Yeah, yeah, and so you come face to face with the reality of what we were talking about at the beginning, and that is that sometimes what you think are opposite groups have the same ideology, and they're not really opposite at all. Mm-hmm. They may disagree over dominance, but not on principle. Mm-hmm. And that's what Yuri found out, is that our agencies, our intelligence agencies, really weren't that much different from the KGB. Mm-hmm.
That's interesting.
And that shocked him.
Sure. Mm-hmm. Yeah, I'll bet. After all he risked to leave that and come to this.
Yeah. And he died in fact, he had to go back to Canada. They didn't want him here in the United States. He went back and lived out the rest of his life in Canada, and he died, I'm told, of alcoholism. Mm-hmm. He was very despondent, discouraged, and a little bit afraid for his life because they were still looking for him. They probably, sure. He thought they would probably shoot him.
Well, Canada, much more pro-socialist, starting with Pierre Elliott Trudeau, a tradition carried on by his son. So maybe he had some actual things to worry about. But that's a nice place to put an ellipses. Mr. G. Edward Griffin, it's an honor to talk to you. Thank you so much for your time.
All right. Well, Patrick, thank you for inviting me, and I'm looking forward to really getting down to the deep stuff next time.
Amen. Okay, very good. This is the Patrick Coffin Show. You can find out all the links inside patrickcoffin.media, find out about realityzone.com and the next Red Pill Expo, all inside patrickcoffin.media. This is the show. See you next time. In the meantime, be a saint. What else is there? Hey, this is Patrick Coffin. If you like what you see and hear and you want to see and hear more, consider joining Coffin Nation as a full member. Just click right here and find out more about what that means. Nipsey, my fedora. That's Coffin Nation, the world's largest online community of culture builders. Click right here. See you on the inside.